One of the inspirations for me starting this channel was Eric July, also known as Young Rippa. He is a music artist and he is a podcaster and a YouTuber. I've been watching his videos on YouTube for probably a little over a year now. Maybe closer to 2 now that I think about it. Anyway, many of the things he says, both in regards to entertainment as well as some of his political philosophy, appealed to me. And he presented his ideas and his criticisms and his solutions in a very straightforward manner. There was no artifice about it. So, when he announced that he was fed up with Marvel and DC, at the time I was pretty much with him. And he announced that he just wasn't going to do it anymore. He wasn't going to review the droppings that Warner Brothers and Disney were trying to pass off as comic book related product. And if he wasn't going to review it, he certainly wasn't going to pay for it. So he stopped going to see him. Now, I hadn't gotten quite to that point yet, but the Phase 4 for Marvel, that's pretty much what did it for me. I was done. I saw what they were presenting as a continuation of phases 1 through 3. And quite frankly, I was insulted. To put that garbage out and try to convince the fans that the problem was them, when everyone could see with their own eyes and hear with their own ears the mess that was being put up on screen. Black Widow was a movie that should have been done years ago. I mean, years and years ago. We're talking post-Civil War. That should have been the first movie out after Civil War. And then you had, let's see, which came first? Eternals. The Eternals. Now, The Eternals is one of those Marvel properties that you pretty much have to have read comic books to even know who the hell they were. And I did read comic books and collected comic books. And even I didn't know who all of them were. So I don't know how the hell they thought. Actually, I do know how the hell they thought they were going to get away with that one. They saw what they did with Guardians of the Galaxy. Also a property you pretty much had to have read comic books to have encountered. And that made a truckload of money. And so they were like, hey, we are geniuses. We are so smart and so talented. We broke the box office with Infinity War and with Endgame. We are masters of all we survey. We can throw anything up on screen and those fools will just slop it up like the stupid pigs they are. Well, surprise, surprise, the fans are actually moderately intelligent. The real fans, the ones that read the comic books and go to see these movies because they want to see what they love in a different medium, those people were checked out as soon as we saw what they were doing. The normies looked at it and they were like, "Huh? What is that? We don't know what this is." And the sorry bastards who actually went to see it were even more confused because that movie was, by all accounts, a mess. And then we have Shang-Chi. Now, the only reason Shang-Chi was made is because Marvel was trying to simp for the Chinese Communist Party. They figured, we'll put an Asian up on screen in the main role, and most of the cast be Asian, and China will love us. What they hadn't counted on is the fact that China has had about as much as they can stand of Hollywood, just like Americans have had about enough as we can stand from Hollywood. And they have their own film industry. And one thing communists don't like is competition. Just go ask the fascists how that goes. Go ask the nationalists how that goes. So China is about ready to kick Hollywood out of their box office in order to protect their own film industry. It's the reason why a lot of the films at Hollywood, the big budget Hollywood movies that have been put out over the last probably about a year, especially from Marvel, have not been shown in China. So what Spider-Man No Way Home did was even more impressive because there was no China to prop that up. And so you had Shang-Chi barely broke even. It might have made a few tens of millions, which for a movie that probably cost over $100 million is kind of embarrassing. You don't make $100 million movies to make $30 million. You make $100 million movies to make hundreds of millions of dollars. And then, what did we have after that? I've lost track of the messes. I know I'm forgetting one. Well, let's skip over that and then go to the next big disappointment. After No Way Home broke $1 billion, Marvel was sure they had another $1 billion hit with Doctor Strange. And they were sorely disappointed. They weren't disappointed by much, and they still made a shipping container full of money. But they expected $1 billion plus on that thing. And so that made them trim back their expectations for Thor Love and Thunder. And the problem with Thor Love and Thunder is it's based on a character nobody wanted. Well, that's not true. The feminists wanted it, but nobody else wanted it. And everybody who has been paying attention to what Hollywood's been doing lately was pretty sure how that was going to go. And that's another movie that barely broke even. That had trouble climbing above $750 million. And that's another one they fully expected to make $1 billion. So, that's Marvel. DC is even more of a mess because it is schizophrenic. It has multiple personality disorder. It is a company that just kind of throws movies out there without a plan, which is something David Zaslav, the chairman of Discovery that now owns Warner Brothers, was well aware of when he got his hands on what Warner was working on. It's one of the reasons why Batgirl was canceled, above and beyond the fact that they could write it off for tax money. But over the last few years, you have had the Nolan trilogy, which almost everybody loved. Yeah, it didn't really stick the landing. The third one was the weakest one. But they were still all pretty solid movies. After that, you had the Snyderverse. And even the Snyderverse was not exactly what Warner should be working on. Because they tried to make all of the characters monotonal. You basically had a dark Superman, a dark Batman, dark everybody, dark Cyborg, dark everybody. And with certain characters, it just doesn't work. Superman being one of them, which is the big problem everybody had with Man of Steel. But it was a good movie, and the Snyder Cut, when they finally did it, was considerably better than what we saw in the theater. But you also had Batman vs. Superman, which wasn't very good. And you had a god-awful Justice League and a god-awful Suicide Squad. And then you come back around and you have a Joker movie off to the side that's not connected. And that's so good it gets Oscars. But then they greenlight a sequel and it's going to be a musical starring Lady Gaga? Okay, whatever. And on another front, you have, in the middle of the pandemic, a new Suicide Squad movie. That's a sort of, but not really, sequel that's gonna soft reboot the series. And somehow it works. That movie had me rolling in laughter. And it was good enough to get a series for John Cena on HBO Max. And again, off to the side, you had a new Batman. And it wasn't going to be like the old Batman movies where you had it campy or basically more for the mainstream normies. It was a dark, brooding detective story. And while it wasn't perfect, and it didn't get $1 billion like Warner wanted it to, it was still pretty damn good. And it's been greenlit for a sequel. But it's not connected to the rest of the universe of DC. And then we have the mess that is The Flash. And anybody who thinks that isn't going to come back to bite somebody in the rear is sorely delusional. Because you have a Flash star in Ezra Miller that is running around choke-slamming pregnant women and getting pervy with underage girls and setting up cults in Iceland and disappearing off the face of the earth and then popping up and saying he's sorry, he's going to get help. And that's the guy you're going to put front and center to pimp your Flash movie. A Flash movie, by the way, that you have done a fair amount of reshoots on, and what was supposed to be a Michael Keaton-centric Batman plot thread is now going to involve a newly re-signed Ben Affleck Batman, which I don't think anybody saw coming. Until they thought about it for 3 seconds and realized something had to save a movie that they were going to have to release in some fashion just to recoup some of the money they were spending on it. This was the movie that was supposed to reset the entire DC film universe. And I think that's gone out the window now because you have Batgirl canceled, severe reshoots on Aquaman, probably because they had to get rid of Amber Heard after her mess, and a Black Adam movie that, along with Aquaman 2, is testing actually worse than Batgirl. So that's the state of comic books on film at the moment. Bleak. To put it in a word, bleak. Because nowhere in Hollywood is the effect of pumping politics into film more obvious than the comic book movies. Before the pandemic, every comic book movie was expected to blow the box office off its lid. Now, we expect most of them to flop. If there's an actual good comic book movie, we're kind of shocked. And if you think the state of comic book movies is bad, where do you think they're getting their material? Comic book industry pretty much went to hell in a handbasket in the mid-2000s through the mid-2010s. This is where a lot of these crap comic book characters are coming from. And Marvel keeps trying to pimp them by giving them run after run in the comics and having most of them fail time and time again. For some reason, that made them think they'd make really good live-action characters. Or in the case of Miles Morales and Gwenpool, have them as animated characters. I mean, Miles Morales has failed so often that he's still called Miles Morales, not Spider-Man. He fails so often that they made a whole line of what-if comics with him as various superheroes because nobody's buying him as Spider-Man. So they had, what if Miles Morales were Captain America? What if Miles Morales were the Hulk? What if Miles Morales was Wolverine? The worst, however, and it was such a racist comic that the writer had to come out, apologize, and he promised to donate everything he made from that issue to charity. And that was, what if Miles Morales were Thor? If you haven't seen it, Google it. I'm sure there are a dozen videos about how bad that thing is. But you had other characters. You had Ironheart, that's coming. You had female Hawkeye, that's coming. Female Thor's already been a thing. You had Miss Marvel. You had America Chavez. She was in the last Doctor Strange movie. You had female Black Panther, that's coming. You had Spider-Girl. You had Miss Thing. You had Hulk-Verine. Process the stupidity of that. Hulk-Verine. You had Asian Hulk, which is where part of Hulk-Verine comes from. Ironheart. You had female Black Panther. You had female Captain Britain. You had female Wolverine. I mean, they basically were going through their catalog of successful heroes and deciding to race and sex swap them. And figuring, yeah, that'll make them popular. And just about the opposite was true for most of those. There were exceptions to the rule, Gwenpool being one of them. Why am I going through all of this? Because Eric July was viewing this landscape of comic bookdom and seeing the discontent by fans, seeing manga just come and take over the American comic book industry, and the American comic book industry go right in the toilet. Used to be the top 20 bestseller list for comic books every month, came out and it would be hundreds of thousands of copies. Nowadays, it's about 40,000. And you have the top 10 graphic novels come out every month, and almost without exception, all of those slots are taken up by Japanese books. Usually there's one or two Korean books on there, but there's usually no American books from Marvel or DC on that list. So Eric July viewed this landscape and thought to himself, why not? Why not start a comic book company? It's not as if DC and Marvel are knocking it out of the park. Disney and Warner Brothers seemingly could not care less how much of a money pit Marvel comic books are right now. And so he announced he was going to start a comic book company. And what did the mainstream media do? At first they laughed. They said, "Oh, that's ridiculous. They've been around for decades, Marvel and DC. You can't go up against Marvel and DC. They're juggernauts. Now, I'm sure some of the people who were saying that were saying it with a hopeful tone to their voice, because they live and die on the access DC and Marvel give them. And so they shill for DC and Marvel like you wouldn't believe. And when Eric July finally announced that he was writing the book, they were like, well, you've never written comic books. You don't know what you're doing. Oh, you're a nobody. And then when he announced who was going to be doing the artwork, it got quieter. There was still some scoffing. Oh, this will never happen. It's a scam. You're never going to come out with a comic book. This is just a way to grift. And when he started talking about how he was renting warehouses and coming up with merchandise and showing logos for the new company, it got even quieter. And suddenly, they started moving goalposts. And when the campaign for pre-orders arrived, and the website crashed in the first day because so many people were trying to get on and order something that was not being produced by people that hate the fans, the goalposts started getting moved even further. At first it was, oh, you'll never ship out the books. Actually, I think it was at first there were no books. And then, oh, you're never going to ship out the books, when he started showing off what the cover looked like. And then when he started showing the boxes of books showing up, and the campaign was breaking 1 million, the goalpost was suddenly, oh, 1 million? What are you talking about? You're going up against Marvel and DC. That's nothing. They didn't even think he was going to get 100,000. Never mind 1 million. And suddenly 1 million's not enough. Well, he sailed right by 1 million. And suddenly the goalpost was 3 million. And when he got to that too, it got quiet. It got real quiet. I haven't heard anybody talking about naysaying in a while. And when he started talking about how they were going to start shipping out the books at the end of September, I think people finally realized they need to stop running their mouths and start being scared, because this nobody who had never done anything in the comic book industry sailed past 3.5 million with a couple of weeks left on the campaign. I don't know what the final tally was. I know the last time I saw it, I think it was close to or over 3.8 million. And the number of individual separate people who ordered was over 50,000. Now, not all of them bought books. However, a lot of them bought multiple books because there were 3 covers. A cover A, a cover B, and a cover C. A, he only printed, I think, like 7,500. B, I think there was only like 2,700. And C was the one where he had enough to cover whatever else people ordered. So you had what is probably the number 1 selling graphic novel in the country on his first try, from somebody who had never done anything in the comic book industry, doesn't know what he's doing, is just grifting, it's just a scam. Now, you might be wondering why I've gone through all of this. because it just so happens I got my copy the other day. Now, unfortunately, it came the day of the Rings of Power, and I've been working on that for 2 days. However, I got around to it today, and I finally read through it. And I think I'm probably going to do a separate review because this has gone on a lot longer than I thought. Probably because I'm this irritated with the comic book industry. And I quite frankly have no idea what Warner Brothers and Disney are thinking whenever they look over the balance sheet of the comic division. Because that balance sheet has got to really, really suck. I would be surprised if they are actually breaking even these days. And now they've got something else to sweat about. Now they've got something besides Japan and South Korea to worry about. Because based on the cover and the artwork, they need to be worried. So I'm going to stop this here, and I'll be back probably not tomorrow because tomorrow is House of the Dragon. But Monday, I think I'm going to go through and do a fairly thorough review of Isom 1, first issue from Rippaverse, written by Eric July, with art by Cliff Richards and Gabe El-Taib. So check back here on Monday for that. If you like what I do here, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel, comment down below. Make sure the bell notification icon is clicked on so you know when I upload new videos. And I will be back tomorrow with the House of the Dragon, Episode 8, spoiler-free review. Bye for now. Tschüss.